The boy's pencil hit the table with a small, defeated tap. "It keeps marking it wrong," he muttered, blinking hard at the tablet in front of him. Across from him, the single father leaned forward, patient, unhurried. "Let's look at how it's thinking," he said gently, turning the screen slightly. His voice carried no authority, only steadiness. He didn't know the woman watching him owned the company that built the software. He had just quietly dismantled. From 2 tables away, she had paused meat. At first, she'd barely noticed him. Worn jacket, calloused hands, coffee gone cold, ordinary invisible. But now she watched the way he studied the screen. Not guessing, not correcting randomly, but tracing the logic behind the logic. "The answer isn't wrong," he told the boy. "The system is weighting the variables incorrectly. See this step? It assumes one constant where there isn't one." The boy blinked. "So it's the program." "It's a pattern flaw," said softly. "Small, but it compounds." The woman's grip tightened around her cup. He wasn't showing off. He wasn't lecturing. He simply drew the equation out on a napkin and shifted one assumption. The tablet flashed green dot. The boy's face lit up, relief rushing in where frustration had lived seconds earlier. From a distance, the mother studied the man more closely now, the quiet composure, the absence of ego. He hadn't asked who designed the software. He hadn't criticized. He had just seen. Most people saw a tired delivery driver helping a stranger's child. She saw something else. He folded the napkin and slid it across the table. "You were right to question it," he told the boy. "Always question patterns that don't feel honest." The words landed heavier than he intended. Outside, traffic moved in polished lines. Inside, something had shifted, though only one of them understood how far that shift might travel. He picked up his coffee, finally taking a sip. And only then did the story begin to move backward, to the morning that had placed him in this chair at all. That morning had begun before the sun, the way most of his mornings did now, not because he had to be awake that early, but because quiet was easier to manage than memory. Daniel Hart stood at the kitchen counter in a small second-floor apartment that carried the faint scent of toast and laundry detergent. The cabinets didn't match. The clock ticked louder than it should have. Across the table, his 7-year-old daughter, Emma, swung her legs beneath her chair while waiting for her oatmeal to cool. "You're thinking again," she said, watching with him over the rim of her glass. "I'm always thinking," he replied, softening it with a smile. He pressed the crease into his work shirt carefully. He ironed every morning. It was a small discipline in a life that had once been measured in deadlines and system architectural maps stretching across glass walls. Back then, people waited for his analysis. Now they waited for deliveries. He had not been forced out. That part mattered. 3 years earlier, Daniel had been a senior data systems architect for an education technology firm whose software ran in thousands of classrooms. He understood scalable logic models, predictive grading algorithms, the quiet mathematics of performance metrics. He had understood them too well. Sometimes, then his wife, Claire, had not come home from a late shift at the hospital. After that, the boardrooms had felt airless. The language of optimization felt cruel. Emma had needed someone at the gate every afternoon at 3:15, not someone chasing quarterly bonuses across time zones, so he left. The resignation letter had been brief. He'd cited personal reprioritization. No one argued. No one tried very hard to stop him either. The unopened envelope sat on the edge of the kitchen counter now, half buried under grocery receipts, cream paper, corporate letterhead, a consulting offer from his former colleague who had since become CTO, flexible hours, significant compensation. You could do this remotely, the email had promised. It's easy money. He hadn't opened it in 11 days. Daddy Emma's spoon hovered mid-air. "Are you coming to Art Day next week?" "I wouldn't miss it," he said without hesitation. Money was tighter than he admitted. Delivery routes didn't pay what architecture once had. He budgeted carefully, paid tuition in installments, and learned to stretch meals without making them feel stretched. But there was a rhythm now, predictable, steady. Breakfast, school drop-off, routes, pick-up, homework, stories, stability over status. He rinsed the bowl and walked Emma to school, her small hand warm in his. She told him about her drawing. She wanted to finish later at the cafe after his shift. "A house with 2 windows and a tree that's brave." "Trees aren't brave," he said. "They are if they stay," she answered matter-factly. He didn't argue with that. By late afternoon, after the last package had been scanned and signed, he found himself at the corner cafe they sometimes used as an in-between space before heading home. Emma spread her coloring pages across a small wooden table near the window, tongue pressed lightly against her lip as she worked. Daniel wrapped his hands around his coffee and allowed himself the quiet across the room. A boy frowned at a tablet that a carefully built and deliberately modest, tilted without warning towards something neither of them had planned. The woman who had been watching finally rose from her table, up close. The contrast sharpened. Her coat was tailored charcoal, precise at the shoulders, the fabric falling clean and deliberate. Daniel's jacket, though neat, carried soft Sims at the cuffs, his boots were polished but worn. The difference wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. It was structural. "Thank you," she said to him first, measured and composed. Then she turned to her son. "Ethan, we need to go." Ethan hesitated. "But he showed me, I'm sure he did," she replied, offering Daniel a polite, almost clinical smile. "It was kind of you to help. Though," she added lightly, "these programs are reviewed by SAS. They're designed to be accurate." Her assistant, who had followed her over, gave Daniel a sympathetic nod that felt more like dismissal than gratitude. "It's easy to misunderstand the interface," he said. "It's adaptive software." Daniel didn't bristle. He didn't correct the tone. He simply turned the tablet back toward them. "It is adaptive," he agreed. "That's the problem." The assistant's smile tightened. "Excuse me," Daniel tapped a previous question. "It's weighting prior performance too heavily. The program assumes consistent variable stability, but children don't perform in straight lines, so it's punishing deviation instead of recalibrating." The assistant blinked. "That's not how the model works." "It is," Daniel said, quietly. "Look at a third step. It treats the interim calculation as fixed rather than contextual. So when he solved it differently, correctly, the system read it as an anomaly." He slid the napkin forward. "The equation was simple. Rewritten without jargon is not wrong," he continued. "It's biased toward conformity. That's fine in data modeling. It's dangerous in education." The cafe noise seemed to dim. The assistant straightened. "Sir, with respect, this platform was developed by a team of data architects," Daniel offered gently. The woman's gaze sharpened. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. "It's a small flaw," he said. "But small flaws scale. If it's implemented nationally, you'll see grade compression. High performers flatten. Creative thinkers get penalized." The assistant looked toward the woman now, uncertain. She stepped closer. "You're speaking very confidently about a system you've seen for less than 5 minutes. Daniel met her eyes evenly. "I've seen variations of it for 15 years. A pause stretched between them. "You work in education technology?" she asked. "I used to." Her son tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, he fixed it." She ignored that for the moment. "You're saying our system misreads alternative logic?" "I'm saying it favors pattern repetition over comprehension." The assistant let out a quiet breath of disbelief. "That's speculation." Daniel shook his head slightly. "No, it's architecture." The word landed differently. For the first time. The woman studied him not as a helpful stranger, but as a variable she hadn't accounted for. "How did you know that?" she asked. It wasn't defensive. It was genuine. Daniel glanced at Emma, who was coloring a tree in careful green strokes. "Because I helped design something very similar once," he said. "And I made the same mistake." Silence followed. "Not uncomfortable." "Not yet." The assistant shifted uneasily. "We should go," he murmured to her, but she didn't move. "You'd understand the implications of what you're suggesting," she said instead. Daniel nodded once. "I do." Outside, a car horn cut through the late afternoon traffic. Inside, the air felt subtly altered. She looked down at the tablet again, then back at him. The politeness in her expression had thinned into calculation. "This platform," she said slowly, "is under review for a federal expansion contract." There it was, the scale of the stakes. And for the first time since he'd picked up his coffee, Daniel understood that the napkin between them no longer belonged to a child's homework. Her name was Victoria Hole, and the building that bore her company's logo occupied 3 full blocks of downtown glass and steel. By the time she returned to her office that evening, the cafe conversation had replayed in her mind enough times to disturb her composure. On the surface, everything was aligned. Halle Learning Systems had spent 3 years developing Adapia Path, a predictive education platform designed to streamline grading, customize lesson pacing, and improve measurable student outcomes. The federal expansion contract would integrate the software into thousands of public schools across the country. Evaluation alone would push the company into a new tier of influence. The internal reviews had been thorough. Legal had signed off. Compliance had signed off. The board had already drafted their congratulatory statements, and yet the phrase lingered, its bias toward conformity. Victoria stood at the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city lights. Below, traffic moved in deliberate lines. Above, her reflection stared back at her, controlled, composed, immovable. Behind her, the door opened without hesitation. "Long day?" asked Marcus Reed, Chief Technology Officer. He didn't wait for permission to enter. He never had. Marcus had been with the company since its early growth phase. Brilliant, efficient, intolerant of delay. He wore confidence the way others wore, cold and pervasive, impossible to ignore. "The cafe incident?" he asked lightly, dropping a tablet onto the conference table. "Your assistant mentioned some delivery driver questioning our model." Victoria didn't answer immediately. "He didn't question it," she said finally. "He identified structural weight and issue." Marcus smiled, thin and patient. "With respect, he identified nothing. The algorithm uses dynamic stabilization to account for performance variation." "Does it?" His expression shifted a fraction. Of course it does. Victoria crossed the room and tapped a screen, pulling up a segment of code. Walk me through this parameter. Marcus stepped closer, eyes scanning. It's a predictive anchor. It keeps performance within measurable range. It locks performance. She corrected it. It stabilizes outcomes, he replied. There it was. Language versus consequence. Run a variant simulation, she said. We've already done that. Run it again. He hesitated. Not long, but long enough. Within minutes, the screen populated with projected student performance curves. The lines were smooth. Too smooth. Introduce alternative solution logic, she instructed. Marcus exhaled. Victoria, this is unnecessary. Introduce it, he complied. The curves shifted. Not dramatically, subtly. High-performing outliers dipped. Nonlinear thinkers flattened toward average. Victoria felt the quiet tightening in her chest. This model penalizes alternative problem-solving paths, she said carefully. Then we're not measuring comprehension. We're measuring compliance. Marcus straightened. That's semantics. The federal board wants consistency metrics. They want improvement data. We deliver improvement data at what cost? At the cost of scalability, he answered, impatience edging into his tone. You don't build nationwide infrastructure around edge cases. Victoria turned toward him fully now. Creative reasoning is not an edge case. Silence expanded between them. Marcus recovered quickly, even if there were a micro-weighting imbalance. And I'm not conceding that there is. The contract is scheduled for final approval in 48 hours. Pulling this now would destabilize the entire negotiation. 48 hours, number echoed louder than it should have. If the flaw is real, she said, and the federal audit detects it post-deployment, the contract collapses, and so does our valuation, Marcus replied flatly. The words hung, heavy and transactional. Truth versus ego, integrity versus momentum. You're reacting to a stranger's observation, Marcus continued. A man who left the industry years ago. How do you know that? She asked. Marcus's jaw shifted. We ran a quick background search, of course they had. Victor returned to the window. The city did not pause for ethical dilemmas. Markets did not reward hesitation. His name is Daniel Hart, Marcus said. Former senior architect at EduSync Systems. Resigned voluntarily. Currently a delivery driver. The last phrase carried an unspoken judgment. Voluntarily, she repeated. Yes. Why? No record of dispute. No termination flag. Personal reasons. Victoria felt something colder than doubt. What if he's right? She asked quietly. Marcus's response was immediate. Isn't how do you know? Because we built this system. We tested it. We optimized it. She turned slowly. Optimization doesn't equal accuracy. For the first time that evening, Marcus did not have an immediate answer. Clock on the wall ticked towards 7. If there is even a 2% structural bias, Victoria continued, we cannot sign. Marcus's composure thinned. You will cost us a 9-figure contract over a theoretical edge case adjustment. I will cost us nothing, she said evenly. If it's not theoretical. Silence again. Different this time, he gathered. His tablet were too far into this to hesitate. She held his gaze. Then let's make sure we're not too far into it to regret. After he left, Victoria remained standing for a long time. The federal confirmation call was scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. 40-8 hours. If Daniel Hart was wrong, she would lose nothing but pride. If he was right, and she ignored it, she would lose everything that had built her name. She reached for her phone. Abigail, she said when her assistant answered. I need Mr. Hart's contact information. Pause. Schedule a private meeting, she added. Tomorrow morning? Because whatever had begun at a small wooden cafe table could not end there. The call came the next morning while Daniel was unloading crates behind a bookstore 2 blocks from the cafe. He let it ring once before answering Mr. Hart. Victoria Haley said without preamble, her tone measured but no longer distant. I'd like to speak with you in person. He leaned against the delivery van, eyes tracking the late-morning pedestrians as if the sidewalk offered an easier equation than the one waiting behind her voice. About the napkin, he asked. About the architecture. There was a pause, long enough to signal that she understood the weight of what she was asking. I'm not consulting anymore, he said. I'm not asking you to consult. That's usually how it begins. He could almost hear her recalibrating. You resigned from EduSync 3 years ago, yeah? Why? He considered not answering. But deflection had never been his reflex. Because my wife died, he said simply. And the work stopped feeling honest. Silence settled on the line. Not uncomfortable. Not prying. Just acknowledgement. I'm sorry, she said finally. He nodded, though she couldn't see it. I am too. Claire had been an emergency physician. Efficient. Tireless. She had believed in systems that saved people in measurable increments. The night she didn't make it home had rearranged the language of urgency in his life. Algorithms had optimized. District-wide performance felt abstract compared to packing school lunches and remembering which art supplies Emma needed on Thursdays. I spent 15 years designing predictive grading models. He continued. I watched districts celebrate improved metrics without asking whether the children had actually learned anything. Patterns are persuasive. They look like progress. And do you think we're persuading ourselves? Victoria said. I think you might be. He heard movement on her end. The quiet shift of a chair. Daniels, he said. More direct now. If you're right, children across the country are being misgreeted. The sentence landed differently, spoken aloud. He closed to his eyes for a moment. That's not my responsibility anymore. It could be, she replied gently. He thought of Emma at the kitchen table that morning, carefully erasing the outline of a tree because the branches didn't feel right yet. She hadn't cared whether the tree matched a rubric. She had cared that it felt true. I left for a reason, he said. High-pressure launches, compressed timelines, board politics. I'm not interested. You're not interested in politics, she corrected. Are you uninterested in accuracy? He didn't answer immediately. I'm not asking you to return, she continued. I'm asking you to look. 1 hour. No commitment beyond that. He glanced toward the bookstore window where his reflection hovered faintly over the stacks of hardcovers inside. Delivery driver. Former architect. Father. There was a time when requests like this would have energized him. Validation of expertise. Invitation back into relevance. Now they felt like gravity pulling against something he had built deliberately. I have a daughter, he said. I know, she replied quietly. You mentioned her yesterday. She gets out of school at 3:15. I'm aware I won't compromise that. You don't have to. You heard no impatience in her voice, no manipulation, only steadiness. Why me? He asked because you saw it in 5 minutes. That answer held no flattery. On de facto, he exhaled slowly. And if I confirm what you suspect, then I pause the contract. 48 hours before federal signing. Yes, that's not a small decision.
No.
She agreed it. Studied the line of parked cars across the street, the way sunlight moved over their windshields in slow increments. Peace had not arrived in his life dramatically. It had come in small, disciplined choices. Ironing shirts, packing lunches, choosing predictable routes over prestige. But peace built on avoidance was not peace at all. I won't rejoin your company, he said at last. I'm not offering that. I won't stand in front of a board. I'm not asking you to. He let the silence stretch one more time. I'll look, he said finally. Nothing more. That's all I need. They've agreed on a time noon at her office. When he ended the call, he remained leaning against the van for a moment longer. He had not said yes to returning. He had not said yes to ambition. He had said yes to looking. And sometimes that was the more dangerous agreement. The conference room was smaller than Daniel expected. Glass walls, one long table, no theatrics. Victoria sat opposite him, nodded her head. Her laptop was already open. The adaptive pad architecture displayed in layered code across the screen. Marcus Reed stood near the window, arms folded, expression controlled. You have 1 hour, Marcus said. Daniel nodded once. That's enough. He didn't begin with the waiting parameter he had mentioned in the cafe. Instead, he moved through the system quietly, scanning structural logic rather than surface functions. His fingers rested lightly on the trackpad. He wasn't hunting for error. He was tracing intention. The room stayed silent except for the faint hum of the ventilation system. After several minutes, he stopped to run a performance inflation simulation, he said. Marcus's jaw tightened. That's not relevant too, it is, Daniel replied calmly. Just run it. Victoria gave a slight nod and Marcus complied. The data populated the screen in smooth, ascending curves, improved comprehension scores, reduced failure rates, standardized performance convergence. On paper, it looked remarkable. Now isolate the correction buffer, Daniel said. Marcus hesitated. There is no correction buffer. There is, Daniel replied. It's hidden under the predictive anchor module. Victoria leaned forward slightly. Marcus typed. A secondary layer surfaced, subtle, almost invisible. A micro-adjustment that recalibrated scores upward when deviation thresholds exceeded expected norms. Daniel's voice remained even. You're not just stabilizing performance, you're correcting it. It's optimization, Marcus said sharply. Minor normalization to reduce volatility. It's artificial inflation, Daniel answered. It prevents measurable decline. Even when decline is real. Victoria's expression did not change, but something in her posture shifted. Daniel scrolled further. There it was, a timestamp embedded within the modification log. The parameter had not existed in early development builds. When was this? Inserted, he asked. Marcus responded too quickly. Standard update phase. Daniel zoomed in on the metadata. The room grew very still. The alteration had been added 6 months earlier, 3 weeks before federal evaluation trials began, and the access ID. Victoria asked quietly. Daniel clicked again. Marcus Reed. The silence that followed carried weight. It's a protective measure, Marcus said evenly. Federal contracts require performance stability. If districts show fluctuation, funding collapses. This prevents panic. It prevents transparency, Daniel corrected. It ensures survival. At what cost? Victoria asked. Marcus's composure thinned. You think other firms don't adjust? This is how national deployment works. You smooth instability. You protect outcomes. You manipulate them, Daniel said. It's minor. It compounds, Daniel replied. Across millions of students. The midpoint of the room shifted then, not physically, but morally. The debate was no longer about error. It was about intention. Victoria stood slowly. Why wasn't this disclosed? She asked. Because it's not material, Marcus answered. Daniel tapped the screen. It's material, and it's deliberate. Victoria looked at the time stump again. If federal auditors detect this post-deployment, Daniel continued, they don't just revoke the contract. They investigate for fraud. Marcus exhaled through his nose. You're catastrophizing. No, Daniel said. I'm modeling consequences. The intellectual reversal had begun. The delivery driver was no longer a variable. It was clarity. Victoria closed the laptop halfway. How many people know about this adjustment? She asked. Marcus didn't respond immediately. That silence was its own admission. Daniel stepped back from the table. You don't need me to confirm anything further, he said. You already know. Victoria's gaze moved between them. The flaw wasn't accidental, it was structural, and someone had built it that way. Prepare the audit documentation, she said finally, her voice steady but colder now. We're convening the board. Mark, expression hardened. You're overreacting. Am I? She replied. Daniel picked up his jacket. His hour was up. The architecture had spoken, and the next room waiting to hear it would not be as quiet. The boardroom was larger than the conference room downstairs, but it carried the same chill of controlled atmosphere. 12 members sat along the polished table, screens open, expressions disciplined. At the far end, Marcus Reed leaned back, in his chair, hands folded, composure restored. Danwood took a seat halfway down the table, nodded the head, not beside Victoria. He did not bring a laptop, only a printed copy of the extracted log files and a single annotated page. Victoria began, without flourish. We've identified a structural modification within the adaptive path architecture that was not disclosed during internal review. A quiet ripple passed along the table. Marcus leaned forward. With respect, that language is misleading. The adjustment in question is a minor stabilization protocol designed to protect institutional confidence. Daniel did not interrupt. Victoria nodded toward him. Mr. Hart. Every eye shifted. He stood slowly, unhurried, as though rising in a classroom rather than a corporate tribunal. I won't use technical jargon, he said evenly. The system includes a corrective buffer that artificially elevates performance metrics when deviation exceeds predictive tolerance. One board member frowned. Artificially, yes. Marcus's smile was thin. Mr. Hard resigned from this industry years ago. He lacks current exposure to regulatory adaptation standards. Daniel met his gaze calmly. Standards don't redefine math. A few members shifted in their seats, Marcus continued, voice smooth. Adaptive path operates within accepted performance modeling frameworks. Small calibrations are common. Daniel nodded. Calibration is common. Concealment isn't. The word hung. Marcus's expression hardened. You're implying intentional deception. I'm stating intentional insertion, Daniel replied. The metadata shows the buffer was added 3 weeks before federal trial deployment. It adjusts outcomes upward under specific thresholds. That's not accidental drift. Victoria watched the room, not the men. One of the senior board members cleared his throat. Mr. Reed, were these adjustments disclosed in the compliance summary? Marcus hesitated. They were considered non-materian. Non-materian to whom? Daniel asked quietly. The contrast in the room sharpened Marcus in tailored precision, defending optimization. Daniel, in modest jacket, defending transparency. Another member leaned forward. If federal auditors detect this buffer post-signing, what are the consequences? Daniel answered before Marcus could. Contract suspension pending investigation. Potential fraud review. Loss of valuation. The room stilled. Marcus's patience thinned into irritation. You're presenting worst-case scenarios. I'm presenting predictable ones, Daniel replied. Victoria stood then, a subtle shift that commanded attention without theatrics. This company was built on trust, she said evenly. If performance metrics require concealment to succeed, they are not performance metrics. They are illusions. Marcus turned toward her. You're risking a 9-figure contract over a parameter that improves district stability. I'm protecting a 9-figure reputation, she answered. Siles expanded. Daniel placed the printed log files in the center of the table. The insertion was time-stamped, he said, and tied to an individual access ID. Several heads turned toward Marcus. His composure faltered briefly. This was strategic foresight, he said. You smooth volatility before it becomes public panic. You smooth truth, Daniel replied. The words carried no heat. Only weight. Victoria looked down the table. Effective immediately. We are triggering an internal regulatory audit. Federal confirmation will be postponed until completion. The room reacted not loudly, but audibly. Breath drawn. Papers shifted. Marcus stood abruptly. Overcorrecting this will destabilize investor confidence. Victoria's gaze did not waver. Then investor confidence needs recalibration. For a moment, no one spoke. Daniel remained standing, not triumphant, not vindicated. Simply, present one board member nodded slowly. Initiate the audit, he said. Another followed. The motion passed. Marcus gathered his tablet sharply. You're allowing a delivery driver to dictate corporate policy. Victoria's voice remained level. No, I'm allowing architecture to dictate integrity. The turning point was not explosive. There was no applause, no raised voices. Only a quiet shift in gravity. Truth had been named in a room built to protect comfort. As Daniel stepped back from the table, Victoria met his eyes briefly, not with gratitude, but recognition. Outside the glass walls, city traffic moved in steady lines. Inside, the first consequences were already assembling. The federal board would receive notice within the hour, and once notice was sent, there would be no quiet return to how things had been. The federal confirmation call was postponed before noon. By evening, the first industry blogs had picked up the delay. Strategic recalibration, one headline suggested. Another used the word instability. Markets dislike pauses more than mistakes. Pauses imply something unseen. Victoria watched the numbers dip across her screen without flinching. Integrity had a cost. She had known that before she spoke in the boardroom. Daniel learned about the market reaction from a passing comment at the loading dock. Someone mentioned Halle learning systems trending for algorithm concerns. He said nothing. That afternoon, Victoria requested a private meeting. Not in the boardroom, not in the glass conference suite. A smaller office, less performative. I owe you thanks, she said when he entered. You don't owe me anything, he replied. I owe you clarity. She slid a folder across the desk. We'd like to offer you a senior advisory position. Flexible structure, competitive compensation. You would lead transparency restructuring. He didn't open the folder. I won't come back, he said gently. Her expression didn't harden, it softened. You don't have to return fully, she said. But I need someone who sees patterns without needing to dominate them. He considered the folder without touching it. The old world had a language he still understood: influence, architecture, reform. But he also understood the cost of proximity. I can consult short-term, he said finally. Project-based, defined. Scope. No board seat, no public role. She nodded once. That's enough. When they stepped back into the lobby, Emma was waiting beside the reception desk, legs swinging slightly, coloring pad balanced on her knees. Victoria approached more carefully this time. Is the tree brave yet? She asked. Emma looked up, surprised, and nodded.